Good day, it's Mrs. Wilburn.
Let's do this, guys. It's Mrs. Klein.
We are here with the Lesson 13 podcast. The name of this lesson is A Growing Sense of Nationhood. The essential question or guiding question is, what did it mean to be an American in the early 1800s? We have some important vocabulary. We have American system, capitalism, folk art, frontier, and spiritual.
All right, you guys, if you'd been there on that rainy night in Maryland during the War of 1812, you might have mistaken the bombardment for thunder. But Maryland lawyer Francis Scott Key knew better as he huddled in a boat in Baltimore Harbor and watched British warships fire on Fort McHenry.
Fort McHenry had a flag so big that the British will have no difficulty seeing it from a distance, said the fort's commander. It was 30 feet high and 42 feet long. Key knew that if the flag came down, it meant that both the fort and Baltimore had been defeated. However, when the sun rose, the flag was still there, and the British were retreating.
Key celebrated by writing a poem, The Defense of Fort McHenry. The poem was published in a newspaper 6 days later, and it was soon reprinted all across the country. It was set to music in 1814 and sung as the Star-Spangled Banner. In 1931, it was proclaimed the national anthem.
Moments like these during the War of 1812 helped give Americans a feeling of national identity and unity.
And unity as well, yeah.
But what did being American mean? How was it different from being European? Alexis de Tocqueville, a French nobleman who toured the United States in 1831 and 1832, had one answer. I do not even know of a country where the love of money holds a greater place in the heart of man, he wrote in his book, Democracy in America. While the pursuit of wealth was an important element of the emerging American identity, there were also other elements that united Americans of different backgrounds and experiences. In this lesson, we're going to be learning how a growing sense of nationhood developed during the early 1800s, in spite of significant differences between various regions of the country.
All right, you guys. So as Mrs. Wilburn was just talking about, there was a surge of patriotism that followed the War of 1812, and that helped forge a new national identity. Leaders like James Monroe hoped that partisan strife or fighting between political parties was a thing of the past. Remember, there was that era of good feelings and everybody was kind of feeling it was good.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Most Americans looked with pride on a rapidly growing country whose brightest days, they believed, lay ahead.
In 1800, 2 out of every 3 Americans still lived within 50 miles of the Atlantic coast, and fewer than 1 in 10 lived west of the Appalachians. These forested mountains extended like a bumpy spine from Maine through Georgia, making travel between east and west very difficult.
Across the Mississippi lay the frontier, a vast unexplored wilderness. Everywhere, travel was difficult and slow. Nothing moved faster than a horse could run. Not people, not goods, not messages. News could take weeks to travel from one city to another as the post office labored to deliver letters and newspapers over rutted, muddy roads.
In part because of geographical differences, distinct regional lifestyles developed, which led to stereotypes or exaggerated images of different groups.
Okay, all right. Uniting the nation required more than building roads and waterways. Citizens needed to feel American. One way to accomplish this was to build on Americans' pride in their government. After the British burned Washington, D.C. during the War of 1812, Congress hired architects to rebuild the White House and the Capitol using Greek and Roman architectural styles.
Another national symbol was born during this period, Uncle Sam. Legend has it that the name came from Sam Wilson, a New York butcher, who had provided the army with meat during the War of 1812. More likely, the name was made up to match the initials U.S. for United States. After the war, Uncle Sam became a popular nickname for the federal government. And a lot of those political cartoons we looked at,
yes,
with the Monroe Doctrine, had Uncle Sam. And the kids didn't know who Uncle Sam was. So it's interesting that they've made mention of it here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I didn't even mention, we looked at them, but I didn't even talk about, they just assumed, okay, that's the United States, but we didn't really utilize the term. All right. However, a national identity requires more than just symbols. Citizens need to share values as well. White American men saw themselves as devoted to individualism and equality, but their commitment to these values did not always extend to enslaved African Americans, American Indians, or women. Still, they were united in the belief that they were different and better than Europeans.
Okay, now we're going to talk about economics.
There you go.
And economic nationalism. So the swelling of nationalist spirit was reflected in proposals from the federal government take a more active role in building the national economy. One of the leading supporters of such measures in Congress was Henry Clay of Kentucky. Clay was a persuasive speaker, full of charm and intelligence.
All right. Clay believed that America's future lay in capitalism, an economic system in which individuals and companies produce and distribute goods for profit. Clay supported an economic plan called the American System. This plan called for taxes on imported goods to protect industry, as well as federal spending on transportation projects like roads and canals.
A third part of Clay's plan was a new national bank to standardize currency and provide credit. Another early champion of economic nationalism was South Carolina's John C. Calhoun. In Congress, Calhoun supported the national bank, a permanent road system, and tax on imports.
A third proponent of nationalism was Daniel Webster of Massachusetts, who had served several terms in both the House and Senate. He voiced strong support for Clay's American system.
So now we're going to go to our judicial system and look at judicial nationalism. Both nationalism and commerce had a friend in the Supreme Court's Chief Justice, John Marshall, appointed by John Adams in 1801. Marshall wrote some of the most important court decisions in U.S. history. Marshall's decisions had two major effects. First, they strengthened the role of the Supreme Court itself and the federal government's power over the states. Second, they encouraged the growth of capitalism.
Okay, all right. So you guys, in this particular lesson, we read about and learned about, listened about a growing sense of nationhood in the United States after the War of 1812. We were developing a nation in a land of differences. There was a spirit of patriotism, as we heard, after the War of 1812 that helped the United States form a national identity, even though distinct lifestyles developed in different regions of the country. This national identity was shown in Americans' pride in symbols such as the White House, the Capitol, and Uncle Sam, and in shared values such as equality.
Okay, right here.
Yeah.
And then just reviewing as well the era of good feelings, which we've talked about in class. So James Monroe, as you guys know, became president in 1816. His presidency is known as the era of good feelings because of the national unity and that the country experienced between 1816 and 1824. During these years, Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, Daniel Webster, they all supported proposals that called for the federal government to take a more active role in developing the nation's economy. Also during this period, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall, helped strengthen federal power over the states and encourage the growth of capitalism. And with that, we are done. Take care, guys.
Regards.